Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to have with us today Professor Claudi Bockting, Professor of Clinical Psychology and Psychiatry, and also co-director of the Center for Urban Mental Health here at the University of Amsterdam. Claudi today will present in this extraordinary urban dialogue her research on common mental health disorders, but these in relation to urban environments. And this is a very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary talk. We're trying to establish a stronger collaboration between the two centers. Maybe I should say now, so that we don't take time from the questions later, that on the 1st of June, the Center for Urban Studies is co-organizing with the Center for Urban Mental Health a networking day. And so anyone who's interested in participating in that is the 1st of June in the afternoon. So anyone interested in participating in that, please keep an eye out on our website of the Center for Urban Studies website, and it will be circulated, Jules will circulate it through our newsletter as well and to all of our members. So I won't take up more time. So Claudi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, hello everyone. It's a pity we cannot meet in person, and I can look you in the eyes. Yes, I'm going to talk about the complexity of mental health, and more specifically urban mental health. And I think the urban part is at least something we have in common. And I represent here the Center for Urban Mental Health, that is actually a research priority area of the University of Amsterdam, and it includes 3 faculties, so the science faculty, the medicine faculty, as well as the faculty of social sciences, and the, I call it the Complexity Institute, that's the Institute of Advanced Studies. And why is it important to focus on this topic? Now, first of all, we know that urban living is on the rise. On the one hand, it's attractive and resourceful to live in a city. But we also face challenges, and it can also be stressful. And you are probably more aware than we are that, like, within a couple of decades, where actually the majority of the population, so 68% of the world population, is expected to live in urban environments. And we also know that urban stress, and then you can think of all kinds of factors, for instance, noise or density of population, or the lack of green spaces, but also other factors like, for instance, the density of socioeconomic low socioeconomic status group, and so on, are associated with urban with stress. Now, we especially focus on mental health problems, mental well-being, but also on mental health conditions, and we call this the big 3. So depression, anxiety, and addiction. And these are definitely the big 3 common mental health conditions. And in the Netherlands, at least 1 out of 5 is, will experience one of these conditions. We know it's per year already very costly, not only, of course, for the person or the family, but also when it comes to more economical costs, like loss of jobs, loss of opportunities, and so on. The good news is we do have effective treatments, so there are effective treatment, and sort of half of the people with mental health conditions respond well to our treatments. And this has also been studied many times in randomized controlled trials comparing to other control conditions. So there's really an indication for effective treatments, and then we're talking about either medication or psychological interventions. These are the bigger, like the most studies have been done on that, or the combinations. But there is a bit of a challenge in that we do not see an increase in the efficacy of these treatments over the past, it depends a bit whether you're optimistic or not, but maybe over the past 30 to 40 years. So we're a bit of, we want to do better. And we have the problem of limited accessibility. So not everyone is able to get help. And this holds for high-income countries, but also for lower middle-income countries. But it's not only in low. You read yesterday, there was in the Netherlands a report from the inspection claiming that there is indeed a problem, for instance, for young people with severe mental health conditions. They do not get the help that they actually need. And then we're talking about young people, for instance, with depression and that are like at a very high risk for suicide, for instance, or who are anorectic and have an underweight. So that means also then at a certain point, it's about life and death. Okay. Now, in the Center for Urban Mental Health, we have a clear mission. Our mission is to unravel new pathways to improve urban mental health. And of course, when you're talking about creating a model, a theoretical account that explains why one person flourishes in a city, whereas someone else gets stuck and will get mental health problems or even mental health conditions, then you sort of, when you already look at this figure, there are many, many factors that play a role. Of course, we also look at urbanicity and all these kind of related factors, but there are many other factors that also play a role. For instance, your genetic vulnerability, your personality, whether or not there are early risk factors. For instance, if you have experienced childhood trauma like misuse or something horrible like that, you have a high chance for later on developing mental health conditions. But also social networks play a role, or sudden catastrophes, or think, for instance, about what we're facing at the moment with corona. So there are many factors that play a role, and what we try to focus on in our Center for Urban Mental Health is not only developing an overall model, taking into account all these variables, but we specifically want to focus on what we call actionable links. So links that you can actually target, either by policy making or by urban planning. And this is something we might want to discuss later on, as well as, of course, for instance, using technical devices for individual interventions. So why is mental health so complex? Now, the problem with mental health conditions is that it's the result of the interplay between individuals, that what you feel, what you think, your physiology, but also how you interact with your environment. And the complex part of this is that it also changes over time. It's defined by having these symptoms. So you cannot find underlying markers. Like, okay, indeed, this person is, for instance, depressed or not based on this and this biological marker. So it's really defined by the symptoms itself. But all these factors, these symptoms can change over time. And even when you experience symptoms, this also has an impact on other factors that are of importance. For instance, even how you perceive the environment. So when you feel very sad, then you see the world or even a busy street as very disturbing and maybe gray. Whereas when you feel better, you think like, wow, this is really nice. This is really architecture. But also when we talk about biological factors, they can change because of having symptomatology. For instance, stress hormones like cortisol, these levels change because you feel low, because you feel sad. So now what I'm saying is actually all these factors that play a role for onset of mental health and also the maintenance of mental health conditions, they actually change over time. And they can also change as a consequence of having symptoms. And to make it even more fascinating or complex, whatever you like, these symptoms can actually also trigger other symptoms. So imagine if you don't sleep well, you can imagine that maybe the next day you have concentration problems. And if you don't sleep well for a week, you also start to feel low and having problems to decide on all kind of things. Maybe you feel more worthless after. Maybe you make mistakes on your work. If you make more mistakes, you might feel even more low. So what does this mean? Also, the symptoms themselves can trigger other symptoms. So this all you have to take into account to get a grasp of, okay, why do these mental health problems arise in some individuals, whereas not in others? And to make it even more complicated, and then I stop, we also know that these changes over time can be very different per individual. And also the type of changes can be abrupt for one individual, whereas in someone else, you gradually feel more anxious and anxious and anxious, and then it's too much. So that means there are a lot of individual differences, not only in the factors, but also how they interact and how they contribute over time. Now, it is possible to embrace this complexity, and that is, I think we're at this moment at a really exciting time frame, because technology helps to study mental health real time. I mean, in the wild. We have all kind of apps and all kind of wearables and so on that gives you an impression not only how people feel, but also what they experience. There is far more closer links with other disciplines. I think the fact that you invite me here is already a proof of that. And of course, also the investment of the University of Amsterdam in these interdisciplinary institutes. And there are now actually new approaches that can deal with complexity issues. So you can move beyond studying only single factors or a few factors. Okay, so how about urban factors and common mental health? Now, this is not a new field of study. So already in 1939, there was a book on this topic. And actually long before that, Eunice van der Wel, one of our PhD students, came up with this book. But even long before that, actually starting from a bit of the late Middle Ages, there was already the idea environments can have an impact on how people feel. So that's not a new idea, but the interaction between these factors have not been studied yet. And now we are still doing research on this. For instance, probably you are aware of studies that actually examined the association between the level of green spaces in the city and the level of mental health problems. The problem is that these are all associations. So it's a bit hard to find out what is the chicken and what is the egg. Maybe the people who have a lot of money are actually able to live near to the green spaces and feel better instead of it has a good effect. So there is some evidence, but the chicken and the egg is still a difficult one. So in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands, they also have studied the association between urbanicity and mental health, indicating that indeed there is an association between urbanicity and depression. Okay, this was done in a pooled analysis of actually 8 Dutch cohort studies. So the higher the urbanization, the higher levels of depression. But you could also say, okay, is this maybe explained by the fact that maybe other people are attracted? So maybe the people who are more prone to depression are attracted to go to the city. Maybe that's a selection bias there, just like maybe people with addiction. Or maybe it's the case that people with depressive symptomatology or depression, they simply do not move out of the city. like it's currently ongoing, for instance, in Amsterdam. A lot of people actually move out in time of Corona because they want to enjoy more space. So what I wanted to say also for this, indeed, we find this association, but it's still a bit difficult to know, okay, what's the chicken and the egg? I'm going to skip this because of time, because what I wanted to discuss with you, that is actually a review, a systematic review, rapid review we did ourselves to examine what kind of factors are actually associated to our common mental health conditions, anxiety, depression, and addiction. Before I do that, you, of course, as urban plannings are probably more aware of that. The problem is how to define urbanicity. There is a large range of definitions and operationalizations of urbanicity. And there is, for instance, also on a far more larger scale, the development of mega cities that are, especially in low and middle income countries, growing faster and faster, and that might have very specific characteristics. And as center, we have like an international consortium with cities that includes as well mega cities in low and middle income countries. So what we did, we actually did a systematic review to examine what urban factors are actually protective, what are risk factors, and which are actually neutral. And we did it in a rapid review. Be aware, we are now currently doing a very extensive review, systematic review. So we hope to give you some more results on that, maybe in 6 to 9 months. So we did find, specifically for depression, that air pollution and noise was associated with a higher risk of depression. And we did find that the protective effect of green spaces. But keep in your mind, these are, of course, correlations, associations. We cannot rule out whether it's causal or not, but at least this association has been found. Also, social factors have been associated to a higher risk of relapse. And why do we collect them here? Because these factors are more prevalent in an urban environment. So that's why our definition of urbanicity for this rapid review is actually the characteristic of urbanicity. And that's why also we examined low socioeconomic status, ethnic discrimination, being part of a sexual minority, and so on, crime and criminality, low social support, economic inequality. So all these factors turned out to be associated to a higher risk of depression. And I think part of this has already been mentioned. So how about anxiety disorders? Now, interesting, we did not find an association between noise and the onset or the maintenance of anxiety, whereas we did find this for depression. Now, this is just explorative. We have to be a bit careful, but we thought it's interesting. Hey, some things have been studied, and it's not so clear that this is there all over the place for all mental health conditions. Also, there we found, these kind of social factors. They increase the risk of anxiety disorders, and most of them are comparable to that of have been found for depression. Although also some studies indicated that being part of an ethnic minority and parental divorce was not associated to the onset of anxiety disorders. And one actually claimed that it might be protective, although I think this was at the level of a trend. Okay, let's go to the substance use disorder. So then I'm talking about addiction. Now, and a clear risk factor was alcohol outlet density. So that is the proximity to getting alcohol. You can understand that the proximity to a specific substance actually can have an impact on either onset or maintenance of addiction. And the same holds for tobacco, also an addictive condition. And almost comparable social factors have been found as risk factors as for depression and partly as anxiety, although here specifically also the peer group is mentioned. And apart from the ethnic minority, but this has also been reported before. Interestingly, we did not find any study that actually found an association between that found protective factors, like for instance, green spaces was not here, also not for anxiety. So this is just a rapid systematic review, and now we're actually going through the full literature on this field. So I'll get back to you later on. So what is necessary, given that so many factors play a role and that not one single factor is responsible for onset of maintenance of these common mental health conditions as well as mental well-being, it's important to have a holistic approach that includes the whole system. So not only the individual or the biology and psychology of the individual, but also the mesosystem like school, environment, neighborhood, as well as the macro like the country or even the world. And this is exactly what we're going to study. We're going to incorporate all these different kind of levels, including the speed with which these factors interact over time and contribute to onset or maintenance or whatever. And this is important because for one individual, it's maybe gradual, whereas for someone else, it can be, that someone has really a good life, good mental well-being, and suddenly, bam, boom, there is, for instance, an anxiety disorder or depression. And we do have the idea that this is very important to take into consideration also when it comes to, for instance, environmental factors like urban factors, like, for instance, noise. You can imagine that noise in a city might maybe not have an impact, but maybe if it's constantly there for a long time, maybe your stress arousal is a bit higher, and then at a certain point, there is a critical transition. This is just an example. Okay, this is our conceptual framework that gives a bit of an idea about how we are going to study this. We study some of the urban factors that have been mentioned here. This is just an example. It does not include all factors we want to take in consideration, and we would love to discuss this further with you. Social factors and individual factors, the timing, and as well the impact on symptomatology, as well as, for instance, depression, but you can also put in here addiction and anxiety and how they change over time. This is an overview of all kind of ongoing PhD projects. For the sake of time, I have no time to discuss this in detail, but we're literally studying this from the biological micro level, like for instance, literally studying the impact of microbiome in your belly, in your gut, on depression, as well as studying the impact of intervening on schools or even on policy level. And if you want to know more about it, these are all the information on the PhD projects are on our website. So feel free to have a look at it, and of course to contact us about it. So I want to end with this. I'm really looking forward to have some time to discuss with you all kind of option things and discussion points, and definitely stay in touch and look at our website and approach us if you have ideas or suggestions. Thank you, Maria and Niels.
Many thanks, Claudi, for outlining the work of your center to us. It's very interesting. And if you do not, okay, maybe it's better to see each other rather than it's good. So I would like to open the floor for, it will be a short discussion, right? We have 15 minutes. minutes. Is that correct? Let me see. Oh, am I wrong? Yes, we have 15 minutes. So let's open the floor for discussion. And you can raise, let me see if I can have an overview. And Jules, perhaps you can help with having this broader overview. You can raise your hand. I can start as you collect your thoughts and discussions. I can start with a question. It's kind of more broad question, Claudi. And I wanted to ask you whether you are currently collaborating in any way with urban scholars at all. And in which ways do you try, if any, to forge this transdisciplinary more connection in a more foundational way? If you do, I don't know what the aims of the center are. So is this something you do or you're interested in? And because apart from the publication you mentioned, I mean, there's much older publications. It's foundational work is Georg Zimmel's Metropolis and Mental Life, which is 1903 already. And then following from that, more recent work by Richard Sennett, or previously the whole psychogeography is theoretical, but also methodological approach towards the interaction between urban space and the brain, as it were, or mental life. So yeah, I was just wondering, how do you approach this connection with urban studies, if at all, and if it is something you're interested in, or it's just urban as a space, as a location for your research that you're interested in?
No, I actually, we don't perceive it as, like, we really like to have an holistic approach. So that does mean that we're actually, by definition, do not perceive urban as just a space. So the whole idea, and that maybe that's something I should stress, like the whole idea, the backbone of this Center for Urban Mental Health is the hypothesis that there are no single factors. So also urban is not a single factor or an urban space. So the idea is like all these factors play a role by themselves, but it is about the interactions, about how they interact over time. And if you talk about urban, within urban, the urban is also a system by itself that is also constantly changing. And so that means that we also, for instance, we do not use one operationalization of urban. So we work at the moment with many proxy that give you an idea of urban, and I thought, and this actually is changing constantly. So for all factors, our ideas behind this, they all play a role. They are all changing constantly, and also the interactions that might be of importance are also changing. So that means that it could be that we will use maybe 20 different types of urbanization operationalizations that are actually changing within months. A good example at this moment is the COVID crisis we're facing at the moment. I do actually think that this has a very big impact also on the concept of urbanicity. And also on how this has an effect on mental well-being. And how people, for instance, use urban environments. For instance, I was last Monday in Amsterdam, and I fully enjoyed it. And that was because almost no one was there. It was like completely empty, and that's why I enjoyed it. So it was for me the most relaxing day, maybe in a half a year. Whereas if I would have done that 2 years ago, I would have had a completely different experience. It's the same city, and of course there are at the moment a bit of less people around there, definitely less, because for instance there are almost no tourists, but still some of the urban factors are completely the same. If you go to specific, like if you go to Amsterdam Zuidoost, maybe there the difference is less extreme. So maybe for that is about what is the backbone of the center and how do we perceive urbanicity. We don't perceive it as one factor or one space, but as something that's, all kind of characteristics of urban spaces that actually change over time, and we study them over time. And while we're doing that, we're still on, refining the hypothesis, how they actually contribute. And of course, we would love to make a next step than only examine association, what has been done most of the time. So if we go through the rapid review, most of the studies did no more than just finding an association between A and B. And then you don't know what came first, A or B, or is it causal or whatever.
Yeah, thank you. That's very useful. Hopefully we can continue this discussion at the networking day for whoever is there, because it's, at least to us at the center, is quite important. Thank you, Claudi. So there is a discussion, question in the chat by Caroline. How did you make the concept of urban operational? And which keywords did you use? Caroline, would you like to add context to your question, or?
No, I was just triggered about it because I saw air pollution, I saw green space. So I was just wondering how you did it, how you make it operational.
Hi, Caroline. Really
Hi,
nice you're here. The operationalization of the keywords are extremely extensive. So that's really, really, really a long list. And I'm happy to send it to you, but it's literally from urban, like really urban terms, as well as all kind of characteristics of urban spaces, like, for instance, low socioeconomic status, or specific keywords that are associated to social connection and urbanicity. So it's very wide. And what we did is we actually did a round in all kind of experts, but we also examined previous reviews that have been done and examined the keywords over there, and then extended it with all kind of keywords related to things that are more prevalent in urban environments than in non-urban environments, apart from more the other kind of things. But I'm happy to send it along.
I would be very interested to see the list. It would be very interesting for me. Also,
And Caroline, I think what's now, because that's even more horrible, what we're doing at the moment, we're now working on a meta-analysis. And there we really have you can enormous lists. And these might be even more interesting for you, because that will be our final results, because then we really hope to do not miss out any study that actually examines mental wellness, mental conditions, and urbanicity or urban related factors.
Very impressive. Very great that you do this work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline and Claudi. Donna, raise your hand.
Yes, hello. And thank you, Claudi, for this really fascinating presentation. And I'm really happy to hear about the potential collaboration. I come from a water background, and I just, perhaps it's both a comment and maybe a question at the end, whether you've heard about this. So we were at a water innovation lab, and particularly looking at the Amsterdam, a colleague who was working for the Dutch collective of water utilities, he mentioned that they were looking at a specific case where there were high levels of pharmaceutical residue in the wastewater. And I don't know if you're aware of that case. And so they were trying to trace it back to the origins of this problem, because it wasn't something, they persist in the water system and then they end up affecting biologically other species. And so they had solutions to intervene at multiple levels. And, the superficial level is, could we have filters that can, filter out these particular chemicals? But they kept digging deeper and eventually realized those were primarily anxiety and depression medicines. And so then it shifted course to the solution becoming something about a pilot blue zone in Amsterdam. And I haven't come across anything about it yet because I hadn't thought about it in all this time, but it might be worth digging up now and finding if that was pursued or what happened. And blue zones are known to be like places around the world that had the longest or longevity and healthier lifestyles for people living there. So I'd be curious, but this is maybe, as we're talking about multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, something that linked these two fields.
Oh, that is really very exciting. I am aware of that. There are actually fish that have antidepressants in their body. And this is not a small problem. Actually, one of the things I worked on a lot in my research life is on finding an alternative for long-term antidepressants. And I managed to do research on that, but also to find alternatives that somehow do the job, maybe even in a bit of a better way. But of course, like always in research, it's never good enough. But I think this is indeed very interesting. I was not aware of this project in the water is it in Amsterdam?
I know that Waternet, for Waternet, it's a very big problem to clean the water. They have a big problem with it.
Yeah.
It is actually a methodology that people, engineers and medics from Amsterdam, researchers have developed, and they have proliferated across the world. And it's actually also used at the moment across the world to detect levels of COVID in a city. So you can assess the load in the city through looking at sewage, affluence. So it's very interesting. You can do all sorts of wonderful methods. But I'm sure you can.
But it's really nice because I just published a paper in which I spent 10 years of my life finding an alternative for long-term antidepressants or developing that. And I just 2 years ago published a paper on that, doing a randomized control trial and finding that a brief psychological intervention in people who use these antidepressants long-term are as good as taking antidepressants for years and years and years. So it's really funny that you bring this together, because there are actually alternatives, doesn't matter now. So I will definitely look that up. You don't know who worked on the research by you do?
I have a colleague who brought up this case, so I will check with him again to see if he has any particular links or resources he can share. Oh, and I'll be happy to pass those.
Yeah, so now this is a good example how maybe different expertise can get together.
And I think it was interesting, that final link, that it was about the urban environment that they were living in, that there were conditions in that context that could, change the dynamics of how people feel about their health. And then that could reduce the use of pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, really good. So if you send me an email, that would be really great. Thank you. Really cool.
Claudi,
and also a good example.
Share your a link to your paper. Talk a bit more about it. We don't have enough time, but maybe you can share a link to your paper on the chat.
But it will be a very medical paper, so I will send it to you. Hopefully I will not bore you, but I'm more than happy to share this. I will do it now in the chats. So if you're interested.
Thanks. Okay, I'm very cautious of time. We have only 2 minutes left, and is there any more questions for Claudi at this moment? Hopefully we can expand this discussion at
Thank you for your really interesting presentation. My question is a more geography or location based question. When you mentioned from low middle income megacities, as a middle income megacity, Istanbul came to my mind. I wonder if have there been any regions or cities prominent in your systematic literature review? And if so, by what factors these case areas came to the fore? I don't know, maybe in your work, you didn't aim at reaching such a geography-based result, but I just wondered.
Yeah, very good questions. And these are indeed one of the things we really want to zoom into with this enormous mega meta. And in this one, we really we aim to get the full literature. And I hope that we will get some more indications of that. It's not always possible, because then there are also less data and resources. But I expect I will probably, if I get back to you maybe in 9 months or 6 months or so, we definitely think we have some more information on this. I can already predict that this is, hi, Caroline is going, that this will be highly dependent as well on the infrastructure as well within the mega city, because also there, you mentioned Istanbul, there might be, so it's more than a mega city, it's also how is the mega city organized? And that might have an impact, for instance, on social cohesion and so on. But anyhow, we will go into that, so great question. Thank you very much for your patience. And I'm so sorry.
For a wonderful, it was great to initiate this and open this discussion. Hopefully more discussions and hopefully collaborations will come up. All these things take time to develop. But this was the first step.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for your time and for having me.